My name is Victoria, and I'm from the workplace sales team here at LineZero. LineZero is a workplace implementation partner working with customers throughout their entire workplace journey. And I want to thank you for joining our session today titled Attracting Diverse Talent to Build an Inclusive Culture of Belonging. With that, I want to introduce our host for today, Samir Chowdhri, who is the Global Head of HR Solutions at Facebook. He brings over 21 years of HR experience at Facebook, Microsoft, Accenture, and GE. Samir is recognized among the top HR leaders in Silicon Valley with expertise on culture, remote work, and digital transformation. With that said, I will now hand over the mic to Samir.
Good afternoon and a good morning to everyone who's joining us today. It's my pleasure to be here with you today at this conference, and I am going to be talking about, as Victoria mentioned, on a topic that is extremely close to my heart, and as an HR practitioner is also something that I am deeply passionate about myself. So hopefully through the course of this session, you will walk away with at least one or two areas of, new areas of hopefully sparking some new ideas and thoughts. That's really what the objective of this, I'm hoping that you will have for the next 30 minutes that we have together, or rather 25 minutes. What I wanted to do was share some thoughts and experiences of my own journey of learning, as I feel like it's just getting started, especially on a topic that's as important as what we're going to be talking today. Introduction in terms of, as I mentioned, besides just the experience piece of it, it really is that I'm hoping that through the course of this discussion, as an HR practitioner, one of the things that I've been appreciative of is learning from some of the experts in the industry. And the more I've learned through this experience is really around how Facebook has approached this, as an organization, how, talking to different workplace customers that I get the privilege to talk to around the world, chief people officers and CEOs around the world, when they think about cultural transformation and change and how they're trying to build a more diverse and inclusive organization. We often have the conversation on what does it really mean for their organization. So hopefully through this, you'll get to see some of the examples and learnings of how we at Facebook are doing this, and also some of the learnings of how we've seen some global organizations do this effectively and are also in this journey of learning and, transforming their organizations. So first, of course, is really, as we think about diversity and inclusion, the part that I always say is that it is really about a mindset versus an initiative or a program. So as we walk into this conversation, I would encourage you to kind of keep that in mind, at the front of your mind, as we go through this. And it's a learning journey, as I mentioned. So there's definitely something more that we all are going to walk away with. Let me start with a brief video that I wanted to play here. So let me just go ahead and play this video for you.
Welcome to my new office. This is where I work. For now. This is my seat. And these are my colleagues. It might get busy at times, but we've got ways of dealing with that. Our meeting rooms are pretty high-tech. Sometimes we're joined by the odd visitor. We spend the day working together. We talk to our customers. We hire new talent. We share our ideas. And we make sure everyone knows what's going on. Yes, we're spread far and wide for now, but we're not disconnected. This is my new office. It's where we make plans for the future, where we move forward, and it's where we get the job done, all of us, together. Workplace from Facebook. Be a part together.
All right, let's start with the topic around diversity, inclusion, and belonging. So I think it's important to kind of say, when we think about diversity, we all appreciate the fact that our diversity is really about just appreciating when people's different backgrounds and different experiences that they bring in. Some of them are given to us by birth in terms of how we look like and what we've experienced through our own journey in our lives. The other one is about the choices we make, and that's really defines us in terms of the diversity we have in the organization. Inclusion is really about making people feel a sense of belonging, really making sure that they feel heard and they feel appreciated and recognized for what they bring into the organization. So when I sum it up in terms of when I say the definition of sense of belonging, it really comes down towards what I learned from one of my peers in the industry, Pat Waters, who's a huge influencer in HR. And I like the way she says, diversity is really about inviting people to your house, and belonging is letting them and making them feel at home, really helping them kind of experience and making them feel that sense of belonging as if it's their own home and they feel comfortable to be able to express themselves. Why is it important? As we all know, it helps us drive innovation. It helps us really move the productivity and helps us drive a level of employee satisfaction. When I think about numbers, in terms of how it's actually measured, we know that having a more diverse, inclusive, and an equitable workforce is going to be more about helping drive profitability and revenue for the organization. It also helps with attracting better talent and driving decision making, but also it is extremely helpful when we think about employee retention in the organization. And finally, but not least, but not, it helps really drive core innovation. And I'll share some examples at Facebook when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of how we kind of correlate and feel that really helps power our innovation in the organization. So when we went through this recent change due to the pandemic, we kind of broke this, COVID-19 really disrupted in many ways what was happening in the world of business, in the world of our lives around the world. And it was something that happened to all of us at the same time. We kind of broke this down into 3 phases: react, adjust, and reemerge. React, we all went, the first and foremost part was making sure that our employees as well as our families were safe. Adjust was around making sure that we were able to then accommodate and figure out a way that we could still be productive, stay in touch with our colleagues, at the same time, make sure we were able to take care of our loved ones. And then reemerge is coming back into the work. For some of you who are joining us today, who I will continue to reference as learners and builders, it's more about that you've probably had to have a frontline workforce, and they never really went into necessarily fully remote, and they've always been on that front line. So I think the part is to remember the fact that as you create as we move towards the future, we're all trying to figure out what the new normal or the next normal is going to look like. And one of the things that I always try to reference is in my learnings is really around the fact that it really comes down to its understanding on where these employees' journeys are individually versus when you build those employee experiences. Because for many people, that normal is going to be around having a lot more flexibility. And that's something in the world we've all kind of experienced and through our own experiences. At Facebook, for us, we are, while being a technology company, we had to go, pivot immediately to fully remote. And that happened overnight. So despite being a very, an in-person organization, we were seamlessly able to do this because we had the infrastructure we were, that was already existing because we were using Workplace, and that we have a device that you see out here called Facebook Portal that we were able to use, having the digital infrastructure that helped us stay connected with our colleagues and stay productive. But at the same time, it also helped us know that we could, reach out and hang out together, whether it's workrooms or whether I needed to join a meeting, it was one click of a button. It also gives me the flexibility to know that I could make myself available when I needed to. I could follow up people, using my phone and device. Some of the experiences that you saw in that video are very resonant with what really helped us build that and, helped us kind of get through some of the initial phases of that transition. But the most important piece is really right now is really making sure that how do we make sure we are creating a sense, we're creating an inclusive culture, especially as we went into that remote, into that remote workforce and working model. It comes down towards when I like to call this the connected culture framework. It really is about having a mindset around how we all connect together when we think about from the journey of the lens of the employee. So it kind of comes back to when you think of the lens of the employee in terms of how they've, where they are in their own journey, and how do you then build that journey experience for them. And it is about the first experience during the candidate and recruiting, then how do you onboard them, bring them into the organization, and what does that pre-onboarding day one and the first 180 days of onboarding experience look like? And then what's their learning journey going to be? What are the career experiences they're going to have? How are they going to be set up for success? How is the manager going to help them be successful and make sure that they feel that sense of inclusion and feel there's an equity of opportunity for them to continue to be successful? And then finally, how do we measure to know, how we are doing? What is the overall sentiment in the organization? What's the level of engagement? And how do we actually measure that sentiment to get a sense of where people are in that journey? All of this kind of comes back, and as you can see, right in the heart of that center is diversity, inclusion, and belonging, because that's really what we believe is where it really thrives when you have a connected culture. And a connected organization is about working through that lens of the employee journey through the course of that journey, and having a mindset of diversity and inclusion all the way through versus just having it as an initiative or a program. Let's talk about what does it mean to have a sense of belonging. The first is about feeling secure. It's about creating that psychological safety. One of the things at Facebook we say on day one is helping people on during their onboarding journey is to say, you should be able to go ahead and experiment with new ideas. And we have leaders come in and share their own failures and how they have learned through those experiences. So one of the core things is about going in and sharing your own journey of your learning. So it's not so much about failing. Failing is something that is permitted and something that when you come in, letting you know that and actually celebrating the success or the fact that you might have tried different things. It may not have worked. What's more important is how did you individually grow and what did you learn from that experience? And not only about having that experience for yourself, but how did you share that experience with others so others could learn from your journey and experience? Second is, how do you feel supported? This comes directly from the leadership and then, of course, from the manager. Creating an environment where you are expressing and making sure you're giving the support necessary to be able to create that support on a day-to-day basis, and just acknowledging that support, saying that you have their back and you're gonna, you want to continue to encourage them to do their best work. Feeling accepted for who we are, the choices we make, and who, what our preferences are. So creating a sense of community of where you celebrate people's differences and making them feel accepted. And especially this comes down to when you have a team setting. How do you make sure you are able to coach your managers and leaders so that they can go ahead and create that environment for their employees? And then feeling included, making sure that even as you work through that room, and whether you're running a team meeting or whether you are welcoming people new into the organization, how do you make sure they all get a voice to be able to express themselves? And how do you kind of make sure that when you are, whether it's doing a one-on-one session with during a check-in with your employees, or it is actually running a leadership team meeting, is making sure that you are going around the room and making sure all voices are heard and they are equitably getting the right input, and so that you can make the best possible decision. And finally, the transparency that goes with it. It really comes down to what's creating an environment where you can then share those experiences more broadly, because people then kind of follow the set of values and behaviors that you set in the organization. And for us, that's really where the power of what we've seen across within Facebook is also about how do we kind of bring those experiences together for our employees at a massive scale across the culture. So belonging, really kind of summarizing here, is about feeling secure, supported, accepted, and included. People often ask me, how do you get there? So it really starts with, the 4 initiatives that we feel are important. How we approach this is through representation, through inclusion, driving equity, and through integration. So first is representation. You've got to start right from the beginning. Representation really talks about when the first part of the journey is when you're bringing people in together. What does it really mean to make sure that they have, during the interview process, we call it a diverse slate approach, which is during recruiting. We ask all the recruiters to make sure that when they're bringing in candidates, to make sure they have representation across all the different groups and minorities as well. And so first is you've got to interview people and you've got to bring them on the table. If they're not even there, you can't even start your journey of building a more diverse and inclusive culture. The second part of that journey then starts around how do we onboard them, and I'll kind of share more details around that. When I talk about employee resource groups, I kind of broadly talk about the social employee resource groups, which are extremely powerful for us in our own journey at Facebook. The pictures you see here are something that we have internally for ourselves as well. And it's a representation of the different groups that exist. These groups are, the way they're structured, really help us not only go ahead and create that, help people find the community and the source of energy that they get every day, but it also helps us innovate on our own products. We are able to go ahead and get different points of view from these groups where they can inform us around how these products will show up before they're actually shipped outside to the broader public. And so this is a great way for us to innovatively get feedback, as well as make sure that we are building inclusive products and we're building inclusive services, and we've taken input across the different variety of different communities. Again, it's a great point of resource in terms of how you can leverage this and use this as a point of education internally within your organization. I say this very often about, if the information is not available within 2 clicks, it's probably never going to get found out, because not many people end up using the information we all design. We have all been in the journey of, if you're a practitioner like me, you've probably built some great learning solutions. And one of the challenges in those learning solutions is that many people don't end up consuming it because discoverability is the biggest challenge. So we build Knowledge Library, which is where we actually have access and, to information, where you can go ahead and host all the information that's available so that it's available to people. The other part of it is making sure that you could use this, whether it's for COVID. A lot of organizations that I work with are using it for COVID response, so they're using it for other initiatives across the organization. Going from there is about how do I now humanize leadership? One of the things that we've seen in a post-COVID world is it's so hard. Personal connection is one of the biggest challenges leaders always say, and they don't feel there's an opportunity for them to feel that sense of inclusion. Comes down towards humanizing the leadership. So what we've seen is our leaders ourselves go and make sure we're able to go ahead and have a conversation and a dialogue, especially with everything that has happened around racial injustice over the last few weeks, which has been extremely unfortunate. And it really comes down towards having a leader show up and come and have a dialogue and have an open conversation about things that are really, really important, but also give clarity in terms of what are the initiatives we're going to drive and how we're going to engage with the community and how we're going to give back to the community as an organization, as well as our own leadership, as well as individually, how they're kind of contributing towards that. The open dialogue, which is basically you go live and you're using your mobile device, which is, makes it a lot more human for you in terms of people get to see who you are. And having a two-way conversation and a live dialogue gives you a quick pulse in terms of how people are feeling and the sentiment they have, but at the same time also gives you the opportunity to go ahead and respond real time to them and help them kind of feel that sense of that they feel heard. They feel that there is, their leaders are really feel that their voices matters, and they feel that sense of connection and belonging in the organization. To sum this up, it really comes down to giving people a voice, creating that psychological safety, and building a sense of community. Yeah, an example I'll share here is around Starbucks, where they have, Starbucks brought together two different parts of the organization. One was the leadership development, where they were creating this environment where they wanted to make better humans, and which is very aligned towards their mission is how do we make better humans? Because they will do so much better in terms of helping drive that culture in their organization, which is very core towards what, to their mission, as you can see, is about celebrating the human spirit. So their leadership series was about going ahead and, creating a group and series of where they would go live and have all the experts across the industry who would then coach and guide them around on these topics like what does courageous leadership mean? How does it mean towards being a community and how they come together? What does inclusion really mean for them as an organization, and giving examples of inclusion. And the second part was pour over sessions, which is having store managers and employees come together and share their own real life experiences on what they're experiencing and how are they growing and learning from each other. Both these initiatives really helped in helping them go ahead and move forward in their journey of building a strong culture and inclusive culture across their organization, as they were able to bring all these diverse voices together. I'll kind of close this, and in the time that we have in the next in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to share with you, and of course you'll have, you can always, ask me questions related to this. I'll leave with the concept of the 3 C's as you think about the pandemic. We call this more about, care, culture, and community. So, when I think about care, I really think about the point of having clear clarity around priorities and goals. Something that we learned in our own experiences, making sure that people had clarity around goals and doing a personal check-in, which is asking your managers to spend just 5 minutes and asking people, how are you doing today? And being clear in terms of what they were going to be measured on and how their impact was going to be measured. Work-life, I call it work-life management versus work-life balance, because a work and life balance is definitely out the door since we've gone into a post-COVID world. So it's really about how do I manage my work and life, the flexibility that I have. So the way we feel about this is, in my experience, is really around how do you personalize my work and life and how do I adjust it to make sure that I can still manage to get my work done, which is I'm way clear in terms of I can show my availability and how I can be accessible. And then how do I engage, making sure that I can get my teams to engage at the time that I'm available. So I can have pre-prepared agendas. I can have a one-on-one conversation in an async way. And then finally, I can have a more intimate conversation across and be able to contribute, as an inclusively in the team, not only just by being in the room, but also even on if I'm not able to participate during that specific time, which is I can come back into the group, I can comment and post, and I can share my ideas and thoughts, and also even challenge and ask questions. So again, it's about how do you actually create the right environment and setup so that in the group setting, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in all the meetings. When I think about culture, it really comes down to a simple thing, which is culture is really about purpose, strategy, and a plan. One of the differences that was different between a good and a great CEO, based on a recent study that was done, was the CEOs that were great, the difference was they were able to create this sense of trust and hope. And the hope is they had some level of clarity around purpose and strategy, but they had a plan, which was they were able to guide the organization and inspire leadership, inspire their teams towards working towards what their mission was and what their purpose was. And they were able to give that sense of hope, which therefore then created that sense of trust. And it all comes down towards creating that level of transparency, whether it's a live Q&A that you do on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis. The other one is about making sure that you're transparently communicating to the frontline employee right down, which is multiple ranks or levels away from you, to be able to hear their voice and be able to respond to them and make them feel that they are connected directly to you. And then you reward them. What is the behavior you want to reward is assigning based on the values of your organization. You know, one thing I'll leave you with is when you're designing a recognition program, one of the things we found powerful was the recognition between a good and a great recognition program was asking the 3 questions. Why are they being recognized? What was the impact of the work that they had? And then what is the company value that you have that they exhibit? So what did they do that actually exhibited the company value? And that was the difference between how you can actually build that inclusive experience. And again, reward the same behaviors that you would do to create that inclusive environment, which again speaks back to your company values. This is an example where Delta Airlines actually did this and implemented this experience for their employees. And they did this where they brought in, and again, Delta is a huge organization, you know, 80 to 90,000 employees, 77% of them are frontline, which means they don't really walk into the office. So bringing 5 different divisions of people to come together and share their experiences. And the way they did that is they created a group called Delta Proud, and they basically said, this is how we would want you to go and just, you know, share your recognition for someone who's going above and beyond. And overnight, you could see there were stories that were being shared through those experiences, and people had 15,000 weekly posts and comments started pouring in, and people started appreciating the work that the other people were doing, which was very aligned towards their Delta Proud values. And again, this is a great example of how they actually managed to shift the curve and help really drive that change and transformation. So I will kind of pause here. One of the things I'll leave you with is, you know, if, you know, as you have questions coming up through the conversation, I'm happy to share, you know, take some of those questions, but I do want to talk about, you know, a concept around community as we go forward. So let me kind of jump on that and talk to you about, you know, how do you first measure, and then how do you actually, and how do you build a strong community in the organization? So first is around measurement. You know, how do I know I'm actually doing well? Something that we spend a lot of time ourselves is, I'm building a program. How do I know this is actually working really well? When leadership specifically wants insights. So we build 2 things. One is insights. Insights helps you, kind of gives you a pulse on what's going well and what's not going well. So you kind of get a pulse of whenever you share something, do you know it's resonating for your employees? You know, do you think you've been able to get all the voices heard and you're able to channel the feedback to the leadership? The second is micropulse. Whenever we launch an initiative, you now have the ability where you want to just do like a quick 3 questions. We do this on a very regular basis where we pulse our own employees, and we do this, you know, we take different audiences and at different frequencies, where we kind of get a pulse of knowing in terms of how do they feel about that particular subject, or how do we get a quick response in terms of how people are feeling right now, whether they feel there's a sense of belonging, do they feel that they feel inclusive, their voices are heard. And the goal here is to make it pretty lightweight. So it's like so the pop-up comes in your work chat conversation, 3 questions and a yes and no. And within 24 hours, you're able to then you're able to roll up the feedback coming in, and you can go ahead and share that back to the leadership. So it's more about having the ease and the tools necessary and the infrastructure, so that way you can have a measured way of checking in your employee sentiment, but also making sure that you're able to then design the experiences you need to help know based on the feedback that you have from the employees. And then finally, I'll close with on talking about community. You know, for us, community really comes down towards having these groups where you create the environment where people come and share their stories. And COVID Stories was one of the groups where people were coming and sharing their experiences and how they were dealing with the crisis. We do know that the minorities were extremely impacted, you know, with the COVID, and having to learn and having our community teach us, all of us, you know, from different backgrounds, ethnicities, and our own experiences and cultural backgrounds, to be able to learn from each other and create that safe space where we could go ahead and voice our opinion, be able to share what our experiences are, and also feel a sense of community where people would lean in and be able to have a positive and a constructive dialogue. And the way we did that is, you know, we have our employee resource groups that I mentioned, but the COVID Stories group was extremely helpful for us, where we were able to, you know, help people navigate through some of these experiences, especially realizing that a lot of the people may not have a lot of people to share this experience with. So loneliness is a very real thing that we all tend to experience. And I think that's something that we were trying to address to make sure that people feel that they could work with their work community as much as they work in their personal lives. The broader concept here is really, when I think about, going from loneliness towards overall well-being of a person, it really is about building that sense of resilience. People always ask me this question: what does well-being mean for you? And I think for me, it really is about, looking at well-being in 4 different dimensions. It's what's your mental well-being, what's your emotional well-being, your social well-being, and your physical well-being. There is a component of financial well-being as well. So depending on what how you can actually help support that in your organization, but give people that support and clarity to help them manage their stress. For us, it really came down towards building resilience, is having these groups that popped up during, in a COVID scenario. Our employees created these groups called mindfulness and well-being, working from home, as well as tips and tricks on how to kind of navigate through on a day-to-day basis. These became the point where people would come together, organize sessions on their own, and really kind of have that sense of community. They felt that there was a sense of connectedness and inspiration they would get on a daily basis, which helped them kind of move forward. The Building Resilience group was very, is informative, where it really helped people know, what does it mean to be vulnerable? How do I build this muscle of resilience to deal with the change that I'm experiencing right now? And how can I be better at this? And how can I learn from my own experiences, but also the experiences of others? It also gave us the opportunity to bring in the experts to come and share some of their own experiences and be able to go ahead and educate us as well in terms of how we could navigate through this change. And finally, the fun part, which is, one of my favorite groups, was SAD Working from Home Meals. This was a group that was created where it popped up as people were learning about how to cook. A majority of the people, we do at Facebook, we were very privileged where we provide people food, on a regular basis for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But when we went into COVID, many people didn't know how to cook. So they decided that, they were learning some of these experiences. So whether you were having a dry toast or you were having a protein bar for breakfast or lunch, people would come and start sharing their experiences. And this is an example of picture that you see is an example of one of them, where Mark himself actually shared this in the group about how he tried to cook one day. And this is a burnt steak with dry couscous on it. So it's just an example about having leaders being vulnerable and kind of feeling that, being able to share about their own experiences here live. And in a similar way, if you have pets or you have kids at home, a support group to kind of help you navigate through in terms of your own experiences on how you're dealing with the change of whether you're homeschooling children or whether you are actually having pets at home. So again, these are just examples about, having that sense of community whenever you have a day where you're not feeling all that great, or you feel lonely and you don't feel like you have the same, you cannot just walk into the office space where you can feel like that sense of connection and that energy. This is really where we feel like the sense of community really help build that energy and help bring people together. So I know this is, in the time that we have, I'm just going to go ahead and open it up to see, what questions you might have, and I'm happy to take on if you would like, learn more.
Thank you so much, Samir. That was great information, and I hope everyone else enjoyed that. As a next step, on top of the questions, we do encourage you to register for our free digital culture workshop. This is a 60-minute workshop to better understand your digital culture score and get practical suggestions on how to digitize your culture. I'm also more than happy to schedule a separate call to walk you through an interactive demo of the Workplace platform and discuss how we can bring Workplace to your organization. Now, we do have some questions from the audience that Holly will ask.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you for Samir for that presentation. So we do have one question that was posed a little earlier in the session, but if we could just reiterate this and summarize our points. So excellent topic. How do you measure inclusion?
Yeah, it's a great topic. I think it's in a broader sense, I would say inclusion is something that you actually measure it individually depending on your own organization, because your culture is going to be extremely unique. So I'm not going to suggest that there's one method for that actually, that would apply to all. But however, what I would share with you though is that one of the things that we've learned, and something that I'm extremely passionate about, is really looking, when you think about inclusion, it really, as I mentioned earlier, if you got to take a step back and look at what are the different touch points in the employee lifecycle journey that you have, whether it's from the candidate experience during the recruiting process, whether it's employee onboarding on day one and how people feel during that day one. What is the learning journey that we set during the first 90 to 180 days? And how are you measuring people's experience during, that part of their onboarding journey, or whether it's career development experiences that you're going to look at from a performance management standpoint. So how are we going to measure performance and how people are able to go ahead and, you get a sense around in terms of manager feedback, whether the employees feel that they feel that sense of inclusion. So I think it's hard to say that there's only one method to kind of measure inclusion. I think the key here is really looking at every stage of the employee and what are the different touch points in that employee lifecycle journey. And the way you would measure this is you have the way we try to do this more is we have two things we do. One is, of course, you do your engagement survey where you have specific questions that you can then go ahead and have inclusion specific questions through that journey to kind of measure in terms of how overall employees feel and do they feel that sense of belonging and inclusion in the organization. Second, a part of it is having more micro pulses at each stage of that journey, which is when you think about recruiting, when somebody gets onboarded, what was their candidate experience, and having a set of questions associated with it. Do you feel like, the recruiter was, do you feel the recruiter was informative? Did they make you feel a sense of connection and belonging to the organization? Did you feel like you were inclusive and heard? Did you feel that the interview panel and the questions that you were asked, were they informative, and did you feel that sense of inclusion when you were being welcomed into the organization? So I think it kind of goes away all the way through that life cycle journey for the employee to make sure. And one of the most important things I will leave you with, which we didn't touch on, is talent management. A lot of people ask me saying, when you look at internal talent mobility, one of the key things people look for when they're trying to make a decision or where they want to go next in their career or where they want the experiences they want, they generally look for, as we all do, is, getting to know about how they manage, whom they're going to be working for and what their internal reputation is in terms of from a leadership standpoint. So one thing we've done is making sure that our leaders, you are able to measure this at a organizational level, which is having specific goals for leaders to be able to go and hold them accountable for how do they create, how are they bringing in talent in the organization? What's the diversity of talent they bring in? Second is around how inclusive do they make people feel? So whether there's through their engagement survey or whether it's through upward feedback to be able to measure that and have a more inclusive strategy. Third, I think is really around looking at in terms of as you're launching in, especially this is something around remote work or hybrid workforce in the future, is as you're thinking of designing experiences, I think one of the things to remember is how are you going to measure, whether it's career development or opportunity and equity, how are you going to be making sure that you are training your managers to be more inclusive, especially and equitable for an employee who's remote first and an employee who's going to be in the office. So someone who is never going to walk into the office to someone who actually gets to work in the office, how do you make sure that there's an equitable experience that they both will have and an equal opportunity that they would all experience so they can be successful and they want to thrive in the organization? Because as I told you, innovation is not an overnight success. It happens, right? Innovation is really around giving people that space where they have that psychological safety, but they feel they're included, they feel their voices are heard, and they have an opportunity where they can express and be recognized for the effort that they're putting into, towards the organization and towards the initiative that they're most passionate about. So unlocking the potential is really what we're all trying to do. And, with all humility, I would say, listen to your employees. They're the best. You'll probably in your culture, you're going to hear, and something from a workplace standpoint. And I'm sure, the LineZero team is extremely, experienced in this, having worked with many customers, where they can actually share with you these examples of how organizations have done this extremely successfully.
Great. Thank you so much, Samir. With that, we'll wrap up today's session. We want to thank everybody for joining today. We appreciate your participation. Any additional questions, we'll go ahead and we'll take offline. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. And to all the learners and builders, I wish you all the best for the sessions that come ahead, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.